Well, there we go. There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman, and this series is going to be on Revolution Radio every Monday at 10 Eastern Time. And we'll be looking at the intersection of humanities and the news and kind of give a background to things, which I think is a good angle that we often don't get when we consider the news stories and things. So I want to give a bit of depth to that. In the hour ahead, and this is generally the format we're going to take for the time being, we'll begin with an appropriate poem. Take a look at a few stories, particularly today, education related. And then I want to spend the second half of our time together kind of laying out how I see this series developing and coordinating with a larger study project. And study has its own rewards, and I think, as I say, that really wading into the humanities, wading into the question that pedagogy is concerned about, which is how we acquire knowledge, can add a great depth to our analysis of current events. This morning, preparing for this, I was struck with all sorts of interesting topics on this network, and I look forward to learning much more about this. Revolution Radio. It was Dr. James Fetzer who told me about this and indeed was able to get the ball rolling to get our show together. So it's still very early in the game. Eventually, sooner than later, I'll have some bumper music to match some of the great hosts on this site. And indeed, I still need to learn how to use Discord to its full potential, but I will have proper thumbnail images and so forth going forward. Now, I would enjoy feedback as to the audio quality here. If it's anything shaky or whatnot, please get in touch with myself or one of the other people at Revolution Radio, some of the managers here, and we'll get to the bottom of it. I checked everything on Discord. They have an internal troubleshooting audio option, and things seemed okay. So please God, things are okay. Without further ado, we're going to get into the poem for this week. And they're not random poems. They have something to do with where we're going week by week. Next week, I'll probably continue to flesh out some of the ideas in the second half of today's episode. And then we'll be off to the races, and you'll see how we'll marry in a systematic fashion different events in the news and the larger topic of the humanities. You'll see how they dovetail quite nicely indeed. But anyhow, for our poem today, we have W.D. Snodgrass's April Inventory. The green Cafalta tree has turned all white and cherry blossoms once more. In one whole year, I haven't learned a blessed thing they pay you for. The blossoms snow down in my hair. The trees and I will soon be bare. The trees have more than I to spare the sleek, expensive girls I teach, younger and pinker every year, bloom gradually out of reach. The pear tree lets its petal drop like dandruff on the tabletop. The girls have grown so young by now I have to nudge myself to stare. This year they smile and mind me how my teeth are falling with my hair. In 30 years I may not get younger, shrewder, or out of debt. The 10th time, just a year ago, I made myself a little list of all the things I ought to know, and then told my parents and a list, and everyone who's trusted me I'd be substantial presently. I haven't read one book about a book, or memorized one plot, or found a mind I did not doubt. I learned one date and then forgot. And one by one the solid scholars get the degrees, the jobs, the dollars, and smile above their starchy collars. I taught my class Whitehead's notions, one lovely girl a song of Mahler's, lacking a source book or promotions. I showed one child the colors of a Luna moth and how to love. I taught myself to name my name, to bark back loose in love and crying, to ease my woman so she came, to ease an old man who was dying. I have not learned how often I can win, can love, but choose to die. I have not learned there is a lie, love shall be blonder, slimmer, younger than my equivocating eye. Love's only by my body's hunger, that I have forces true to feel, or that lovely world is real. While scholars speak authority and wear their ulcers on their sleeves, my eyes and spectacles shall see these trees procure and spend their leaves. There is a value underneath, the gold and silver in my teeth. Though trees turn bare and girls turn wives, we shall afford our costly seasons. There is a generous survives that will outspeak and has its reasons. There is a loveliness exists, preserves us, not for specialists. Tu autem Domine miserere nobis, de gracias. Thus is the April Inventory by the poet W.D. Snodgrass, who was, of course, a professor. So I thought that was an appropriate poem to kick things off with on this series. Whilst it is a great meditation on aging, there is also the aspect of sticking around a subject for a long time. And later on in this show, I'm going to introduce the project. By day, I run a small college here in Connecticut, and I'll speak much more about that as we go along. But one of the aspects of that is this thing called the project, this unified humanities curricula, which I see this series as being really a way to keep me organized as I compile this synoptical look at human life on the earth, always trying to plug it into things that are going on now, appropriate to this Revolution Radio audience. And for the project and for any study to bear fruit, and for our interest in this series in particular, to cast a deeper light of knowledge on the stories in the press, we need to stick with a topic for a while. That's what I think this series can very much bring to the table, as we say. That is the idea of long-term application to a topic. We're really losing that as a generation with the social media and various other trends, the buy on demand and all sorts of things conspire to give us, well, I'm afraid, a knowledge of life in all of its aspects, which is quite shallow indeed. And I thought this poem, April Inventory, pointed out some of the fruits of aging, or maybe not the fruits of aging, but the reality of aging, but also, indeed, an abiding satisfaction with being around a topic for so long, whether that's culture in the case of Professor Snodgrass, the author, or whatever the case may be. There is a familiarity and an ease that we have with these subjects. I think that we've lost. Earlier generations had this because of the way of their worldview, let's say. We've lost it, but we can recover it, and that's what we're doing in this series in particular. Now, our first day in this Revolution Radio series is on the 16th of February, this year of grace 2026. And by happenstance, I happen to wonder, when did Rush Limbaugh die? I know that he passed away around this time, and sure enough, it's on the 17th of February. Rush Limbaugh here in America was a very significant figure in the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s in radio, and I think probably more than anyone else is responsible, at least in his time, for carrying over radio and popularizing radio, and particularly talk radio, as a medium. And I thought one of the more endearing things that President Trump ever did was to give Rush Limbaugh, towards the end of his life, maybe even in January of 21, a month before he died, the Medal of Freedom, which is the highest award that can be given to a say a civilian, I suppose they call it, a non-military award. It's a Medal of Freedom. And I always get tickled when I think back to the day after the 2016 election. You can find the recording of Rush Limbaugh. He was nearly in tears that Donald Trump had won. I think we forget how unusual that election and the whole Trump phenomena was. But anyhow, Rush Limbaugh, it's interesting, I find, and perhaps consoling, that on the near enough anniversary of his death, that we're picking up and we're kind of continuing not just Rush Limbaugh's legacy, but the great legacy of radio. And indeed, there has been a marvelous renaissance of audio content with the podcast format. And there is something, on this Revolution Radio network, there really is something that we call it legacy media, but we oughtn't be too snarky with that. Format like a radio station or a newspaper, compared to the podcast, there really is an aspect that is communal in a way that podcasts simply are not. And there's a place for podcasts. It needn't be one or the other, but whether it's a newspaper or a radio station like this Revolution Radio, yes, there's a communal aspect of it, of the audience. I've noticed on the Discord a great banter that people have back and forth. I look forward to learning how to use this website. And indeed, amongst the hosts and things, and iron sharpens iron. And one of the cool things about so-called legacy media of a more traditional radio station like this is that it puts you in contact with ideas that maybe you've forgotten about or weren't aware of. There is a real danger in the over-curated aspect of the new media, as we might call it, and indeed the new education, too, or this alternative education that I'm involved with. Having the community of Revolution Radio really does put you in contact with all sorts of ideas, even just kind of waiting in the wings before the show today. I noticed, events and references I'd kind of forgotten. There was a kind of a look at the satanic panic, as the media called it, and certain things, even in the early 2000s, we'll say the time of the Obama administration, that I'd forgotten about altogether, and was very happy to be reacquainted with. So, indeed, what an inaugural day this is. So we're going to move now to our next segment on this show, and it is looking at news stories. And starting off, probably for the next few weeks, they'll be focused on education, but then we'll zone in on why you're really here, which is for all the political and cultural stuff. But epistemology is the name we have for how we understand knowledge and how we digest knowledge. And the way this is done, we might separate and call that pedagogy. And this is very important. And I'll talk a lot about these topics. This society, when we do get to news stories proper, probably the sort that you're more used to on this network, we're going to have occasion again and again to go back to this observation that this world that we see, whether it's problematic or blessed or somewhere in between, whatever the topic may be, however it strikes us, this world that we see in this society is largely the result of thinking. In fact, every single thing you see and every social arrangement that you see comes out of thinking. Whether that is a pen or the chair that you're sitting on or the building across the street or the way your neighbor treated you or whatever the case may be. I happen to be waylaid in my wicked habits. I happen to be waylaid in true crime and all of those nasty crimes of murder and whatever, revenge and pettiness oftentimes. Besides, all of those come from thinking patterns, and happy things altogether do as well. The way we assimilate knowledge is often the way we're going to bounce it back into the real world, as we say, the physical world. Real, not to digress, but real comes from a Latin word, res, and it literally means something that's tangible. It kind of loses that when it comes into English as real or reality. Howsoever, indeed, let us kick off with some news stories here. Again, we are on the 16th of February, and our first story is from the Oregonian, and it deals with the topic of special education and integration of these populations into the larger classroom world and growing pains. And indeed, in the future, we will certainly analyze the very real stresses that the public education system is under. There are many things, I believe, that the public education system does poorly. Some of that's in its DNA. But there are other things which have kind of been thrown in its lap, and there are massive, massive changes happening to the nature of the middle class, which is not nearly discussed as much as it should be. But that remains for a future analysis. What is appropriate today is this story. And I'm not going to read, when we do these stories, I'm not going to read word for word. I'll just read a couple paragraphs and then analyze things. So 5-year-old Brom Brisboy doesn't yet speak in full sentences. His significant cognitive and speech issues make communication difficult, but his mother, Marilyn, believes that if he could, he'd tell her how much he loves his school. By the way, this is from the Oregonian, this article by Julia Silverman, and the proper title here is, well, I ran this through a website called Textize, which strips it of a lot of the, well, paywall and also advertisements, but I'm not seeing the proper title here. So you can just look that up as of this broadcast. Julia Silverman, the Oregonian. It's entitled, here we go, Education Interrupted at Portland School Grapples with Blending High-Need Students and Mainstream Classrooms. All right, so that's quite a mouthful. Okay, so that's why, at a tense meeting in early December with teachers and officials at Peninsula Elementary in North Parkland, Kenton neighborhood, she, the mother, Marilyn, tried to emphasize the positive, even as she pressed for more support for her son's special needs. I told his teacher, quote, "You're doing a good job. My son wants to return every day, so you need to focus on that," Brisboy said. I said it's not all bad. He's not getting the help or the education that he deserved, but at least he wants to be there. Their family's story underscores both the inherent promise and the significant challenges of Portland Public Schools' 4-year-old effort to include students with profound medical or behavioral needs in general education classrooms at their neighborhood schools, rather than enroll them in specialized classrooms, sometimes in schools far from their homes. In theory, the district's neighborhood inclusion model aims to replicate the same supports in a typical classroom that a child with high complex needs would get if they were instead placed in one of the district's 38 so-called focus classrooms in elementary and K-8 schools. Such focus classrooms feature low student-to-teacher ratios that are expensive to maintain. Those supports would include help from the paraeducators. These are educational assistants, paras, who work solely with special needs children, or lessons designed by a special education teacher. It could also mean regular visits from speech-language pathologists, mental health providers, occupational therapists, adaptive physical education teachers, or school psychologists. I'll just read one little bit here, and I'll make a few points and boogie-woogie. But turning that goal into reality and moving roughly 950 children with complex needs into the general education classrooms has been easier said than done. Parents and teachers say themselves. That's particularly true when school districts around Oregon are coping with a shortage of both paraeducators and special education teachers, a growing population of students with special needs, and stretched thin budgets. So here we see, and I leave it to you to read the remainder of this article by Julia Silverman from the Oregonian. Once again, education interrupted. Portland school grapples with the blending of high-need students and mainstream classrooms. That's the article. Please look it up, read the whole thing. But a few points we can see here, and in all of these, of course, we'll be revisiting them in our time ahead every Monday on this Revolution Radio from 10 a.m. to 11. And the first of which is you have presumably a very idealistic Portland, Oregon, a very progressive school district wanting to integrate these different children. Special needs, of course, is a massive umbrella term for, well, just that, any contingency that needs to be dealt with in that regard. You have that colliding with a few other things, the reality of finances and the availability of teachers right now across the country. And this has been the case for a while, and it's accelerating. There is a massive teacher shortage, and of course, that's going to affect the paras and indeed these rather idealistic attempts to integrate special needs with the general education students. So you just have a real paucity of staff. I mean, who wants to work in America where the teacher is a whipping boy in the culture wars and is paid nearly nothing at all? And that's the public school teacher. Forget about private school teachers' situations. And then the real collision, and you can even see this in parts of the article we didn't read, is the nature of the middle class, as I said, and the parents that form that middle class. They've been taught, right? These are now people in their 30s and 40s. They've been reared themselves from the breast to believe that this school serves them. And in fact, everything in society is supposed to serve them. They're supposed to be consumers. This is a sea change since the 1970s and 1980s, where it was deliberately introduced by the ruling class, the whole consumeristic fundamental belonging to society, as opposed to the citizen. The citizen concept has its own limitations, certainly. But one of the big differences between being a citizen and being a consumer is that your ass owes no loyalty to anybody whatsoever. As a consumer, you and I exist as little babies to be served by people we pay. There's no obligation to society that you had in the previous so-called citizenship model. And the earlier perhaps religious identity that people had prior to the modern era, where there was also a communal understanding of obligations and rights. The modern parents that are going to the school board meetings here in Portland and elsewhere, they have a much more immature understanding of the school. So when you have a bunch of students with difficulties, including communication difficulties, behavioral difficulties, dumped in classrooms with insufficient teaching staff to begin with, let alone specialized teaching staff. This is going to cause problems, and the only language that the poor parents have is that of the wine mom who demands at the school board meeting, "You work for me." All of us need to really go back to the drawing board of what we're doing in society and realize that not only do we have obligations that match the amount of rights that we have to our neighbors, but also patience with each other and patience with staffing difficulties and so forth. And of course, that's not made at all easy given the nature of Rockefeller education, which is deliberately, I believe, designed to dull and to mute and to rip out the roots, I can use many similes, of long-term thinking. All right, so that's our first article here. And then concluding this segment, probably more interesting to the sorts of people who think outside the box at Revolution Radio, and that is our next article from forward.com, which is subtitled, the publication, Jewish Independent Nonprofit. The article as the last generation of Holocaust survivors die, is AI the future of Holocaust education? Subtitled, an AI-powered digital Holocaust survivor is making the rounds at New York schools and shuls, which must be a Yiddish word for schools. That's S-H-U-L, shul. All right. Now, I may even give over a month or two of these Revolution Radio broadcasts to this topic when the time comes. But I've been quite hip deep in researching what people call the Holocaust for the past year. I've actually committed to reading every single book in the library, and I will dutifully report on that when the time comes. And needless to say, it's certainly not what Steven Spielberg presents to us. So I'm always interested in, shall we say, the mythology of the Holocaust. That is to say, how this event, and there were definite crimes on the so-called Jewish people in the Second World War, but I say mythology in the sense that how these definite crimes have been interpreted in subsequent generations. So right now, as of this broadcast in the 2020s, having redefined what a quote-unquote Holocaust survivor is to include, I think it's down to like the grandchildren, theoretically, of people who were in these camps and whatnot. Even these grandchildren are casting this mortal coil. And so enter AI. And this is interesting, this topic, not just for the Holocaust analysis and how that story is used for political ends nowadays and for other ends altogether, but also for the larger topic of telephonia in schools, and in particular this AI. So I'll read a bit here and then jibber jabber, and we'll get on to our last main segment here, our entree in this maiden voyage, this maiden episode of our Revolution Radio show. Okay, so at a Brooklyn synagogue on a recent Monday afternoon, a video of Holocaust survivor Sonia Warshawski played on a 2-foot-tall box, seated in a leopard print chair, good for her, her hands folded in her lap. Warshawski blinked and nodded her head expectantly on a continuous loop. Quote unquote, did anyone else from your family survive? A Hebrew school student asked. The AI-powered avatar. So, that's why she's speaking in a continuous loop. It's a robot. Okay, the video cut to a separate clip. Warshawski said she and her sister had survived. I want to be very clear here. This is the AI of Warshawski. So it's not she, it's this robot. I'll hold my fire on things, but we really, really need to not be calling these robots I. They need to not be speaking. Their programmers need to not have them speaking in the first person singular. I think this, and likewise, we need to not be referring to these things because they are things as she and he. So Warshawski, the robot, said it and its quote-unquote sister, the other robot, had survived. Her robot brother, this is all a simulacrum, right? Mother and father did not. Warshawski, the real woman who survived the 3 concentration camps and ran a tailoring shop in Kansas City, remarkably until 2023, had made it part of her life's mission to tell her story wherever she could. She spoke with students, filmed the 2016 documentary, Big Sonia, about her life, and was even a guest speaker at a local prison. Even the prisoners have to get the Holocaust story. But Warshawski knew she wouldn't live forever. It's remarkable that a woman so old, even if she was a grandchild, was still running a business in 2020, going out to prisons and speaking. Anyhow, so in 2021, with the help of the interactive media company Storyfile and her granddaughter's production company, Inflatable Film, Warshawski recorded answers to hundreds of questions about her life. Quote unquote, what do you remember about the Death March? Or quote unquote, why do you like leopard print so much? Those answers were loaded into an AI-powered avatar of Warshawski that can converse through a video screen. which debuted as an exhibit at the Museum of Kansas City last year. The technology also caught the attention of Blue Card, a nonprofit that provides financial assistance to Holocaust survivors in need. The organization adapted into a portable format and brought the virtual Warshawski to 20 schools and community centers across New York area over the past year, which plans to expand nationwide. A parallel effort from the USC Shoah Foundation called Dimensions in Testimony also enables students to have conversations with virtual versions of Holocaust survivors. One last paragraph, and we'll make the points here and conclude this news segment on this new broadcast for Revolution Radio every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern. The initiative reflects recognition that as survivors age, a model of Holocaust education built on firsthand testimony will be increasingly difficult to sustain. No lesson plan can match the impact of hearing directly from survivors, many of whom dedicate their golden years to speaking tours, retelling the traumatic stories. But 90% of the world's roughly 200,000 living Holocaust survivors, and again, I do want to interject that this is a very generous demarcation, how you can have so many people, coming to mind that, went through the camps and so forth. Well, again, the people who come up with these definitions have redefined this to include generations after the actual people in the camps. It almost reminds you of like how in China in the 1990s, I believe, there were a few cities that were competing to be the biggest city in the world. And so the reason they were able to do that is literally the CCP town council people just made the borders of the city 100 miles in every direction. It's not like it was like 1 billion people in the city. It was rather, it's a legal fiction. That's what I'm trying to say, right? These giant cities in China are a legal fiction. They just arbitrarily, on one designation, redefine the city borders to be, 10 times bigger than New York or something. And likewise, Holocaust survivor becomes children or grandchildren. But that's how you end up remarkably in the 2020s with 200,000 people being these so-called survivors. For aging survivors who have already lost so much of their lives to violence and deprivation, the weight of transmitting Holocaust memories to the next generation is a burden they cannot shoulder alone. And of course, I must go down to the quick reference to Anne Frank here. There is a lot in the mainstream Holocaust narrative that is false, and there is a lot, conversely, in the critique of the Holocaust narrative that is also false. But in each instance, we can agree that Anne Frank is a fictional character, and I hope I didn't cause too much of a shock with that. But it is interesting that there is now an AI Anne Frank, which is about as real as the quote-unquote historical Anne Frank. Not everyone draws, this will be my last point on this, the last reading, and then I'll make my point and move on. Not everyone draws the same line. Last year, a Utah-based tech startup called School AI drew controversy for its AI-generated version of Anne Frank, which spits out responses that Frank never wrote herself. Now I'm going to editorialize. Just because Anne Frank doesn't exist and she never wrote anything herself. Heinrich Schoenemann, a German historian who tested the chatbot, found AI Frank avoided holding Nazis responsible for her death and spun her story in an overly positive light. How anyone thinks, quote unquote, that this is even remotely appropriate is beyond me, Schoenemann protested to social media, adding that the technology violates every premise of Holocaust education and amounted to a kind of grave robbing. Well, you can't rob the grave of someone who never existed. Okay, so a few things here. Interesting, again, why are we learning about this? Why let's see, are the New Yorkers, whether they're Jews or not, it seems there were some Christians that were carted in from a neighboring school, are they getting the same background in American history, in Anglo history? Why is this topic given, with all of its distortions notwithstanding, nearly as much attention as it gets in schools, especially when a lot of the foundational aspects of education aren't in place? Now, that's not all the school's fault. For reasons I mentioned earlier, the nature of the middle class is having changed so dramatically, has a lot to do, and I don't think that analysis nearly is brought up in the education critique as much as it ought to be. You've probably come across these things where someone online or in a book or something will list test from 1890 or 1920 for seventh graders, and it'll sound like a master's degree thesis, and yet this was something given to students 100 years ago normally. And one of the reasons, again, is that the reading and the cultural references and the domestic education, I'm not talking formal education, the domestic education that a child received in his middle class home from 100 years ago was head and shoulders better than it is now. And what you're having now are not just parents that were raised on televisions, but these cell phones, which are designed to make people stupid. And this is well attested from the Silicon Valley people. This is why they don't let their children use these machines. So you have that going on. So getting back to the Holocaust point here, it would be nice to focus on bread and butter topics, meat and potato topics, whatever your food analogy is. We're not quite within spitting distance of lunchtime here on the East Coast, but anyhow. So you have that analysis. Why on earth is this so-called Holocaust education given any of the attention that it's given in volume, especially since there are some very real problems with the nature of why and the intentions of the people funding this, why this education is so expansive. So you have that going on. And then just the analyses of the use of telephonia in schools. People in general, and particularly children, maybe the children are more honest, react completely different around machines and far more casually than they do in real life. And especially with grade school children, any use of telephonia, by which we mean radio, movies, television, radio, except I guess you can fill your kids' heads with the shows of Revolution Radio, notwithstanding, but certainly AI, certainly these apps, these educational AV media really can only be like dessert for a child. They must never ever be pervasive, either in the domestic situation. You can watch a little bit maybe on the weekends. You can use a little bit in classroom once in a while. You can watch a movie once in a while, maybe even use an AI machine, but they are only auxiliary. They are only auxiliary. I use different things. This topic has come up on my work outside of Revolution Radio a couple of times since the start of the year. I reckon it will continue as AI popularizes, and the question being, how much digital footprint do we give to the child for education? And one simile I mentioned, if you're at all into military history, which I think we'll touch on in this series down the line, is winning a battle. Right? You do not win a battle with special forces. You do not win a battle with drones. You do not win a battle with missiles. You do not win a battle with cavalry or snipers. You don't even win a battle with submarines, or even with the Navy. Not to be too chauvinistic, I've always had a soft spot for the infantry over the Navy. All of the previous branches and specialties are just that. They're auxiliary, they're special. They are never meant to carry the brunt of winning a battle. The infantry wins battles. Likewise, when it comes to education, this is a simile. Likewise, when it comes to education, you do not use films and recordings and these AI machines and TikTok and God knows what else, online classrooms, very much. Sometimes you have to use the online stuff because of the distance from the student. Okay, it's better than nothing. But especially for a child, you have to understand that they interact. I think the children, as I say, are probably more honest. I think adults are just as likely to dick around with AI and all sorts of digital and telephonic media. I think just the adults, as adults are very good at doing, are good at putting on masks, whereas children are not, to their credit. And so you need to go to the Rockefeller schools to learn how to be a phony for the rest of your life. But in any case, this past Sunday, I happened to be in a church. Once in a while, I'll darken the door of a church, and the bishop wanted some fundraising video shown in place of the homily, and so it was, because the bishop owns the building, so he gets to do whatever the hell he wants. And it was very interesting. Anyhow, there were some children in the pew in front of me, and up until the television was wheeled into the sanctuary, the children were, their comportment was there. They were sitting up straight and so forth. When the television message began to be broadcast, immediately they slumped down. They put their head on their parents' shoulders. Okay, very charming, very cute, but they're zoning out. Let's be real here. They're zoning out. And it's interesting because in the rest of the sanctuary, I heard, children beginning to chit-chat, right? Because in their minds, right, it's telephonia. It's not to be taken seriously. It's background information. I think it's such, and I'll conclude these remarks here. I think it's the case with the Netflix corporation, in fact, that it's their policy to not really make serious material. And they call it casual viewing. They understand from their metrics and different surveys and things they take that most of the people watching their Netflix shows, and this is the cutting edge of telephonic media, the cutting edge, the people are not actually paying attention. It's they call it passive viewing. People aren't actually even paying attention. It's literally just images and sounds. It's beyond just the beta wave stuff. Some of us from the 1990s and 2000s might remember the critique of television kicking you into a different mental state called the beta, or the kind of passive viewer. I believe in the 1950s and 60s, they used to have an additional slide on the projectors in the films. I don't know the film rate per second, but it was 1 or 2 shots every second out of 50 shots of an image in the old movies, where it would be like Coke and popcorn or something, and it was subliminally programming people because they were already in a suspended reality by just watching it. And anyhow, bringing things all together and concluding this section on the Holocaust AI teacher, children automatically are just going to, it's a fun time. Then you have the whole gamification and things. But really, we have to, and this is a much bigger topic altogether, going back even to our first article, we really do need to ask ourselves what we're doing with education. What a beautiful, in our last 10 minutes, what a beautiful segue to our final thing. So this is the first broadcast on Revolution Radio of my Monday series. And you'll notice it's so new that I've actually forgotten what the proper title of this series is. When I set it up a month ago, I neglected to write down the title here. We'll learn it all together as we go along. But how I see this series developing. So I began this, mentioning that one of the deficits, I think, in the research community, the truth community, maybe more conventional political designations we might apply to ourselves, is there's a lack of depth. And one of the reasons, it's very natural, is we're being bombarded with all sorts of information. Some of it's quite specialized and, quite niche. I think, especially on this series and this station, people are very conspiratorial and very, very analytic, and that's to be quite commended. But sometimes we lose the larger context. There's a priest from California, and he says about the Holy Bible what we can apply really to any text and any amount of learning. And it's this: a text without context is no text. A text without context is no text. And I hope in this series to especially give a larger context to things. We might stick with a story in the press, in the blogosphere, on the YouTube videos and BitChute and Revolution Radio, news breaks and whatever, that might just pop in for a day or two and then pop out. We, in this series, will likely bog down for a longer time. I'll have additional readings and so forth. And these are going to be centered around this thing I call the project, which is using a core of poetry readings and a core text, in this instance, the outline of history about H.G. Wells, having a center of readings. I'm developing outside of this series, but I really see this series as a way to keep me on track with this, and I hope to keep everyone up to date for this as we move along. The series of books, 4 volumes, 1 for each season. And in the course of reading over a year, we will cover everything from caveman days until now. Not necessarily in depth. That's what this series is for. That's what classroom time is for. That's what private study outside of the project is for. But what the project is, these 4 volumes, is a marvelous way to scaffold study and to stay limber on cultural references of various sorts. And so you may access the 2 provisional volumes of this at ApocatastasisInstitute.wordpress.com/the-project. And you can download those for free. And now that I will be joining you every Monday, it will also keep this on the front burner, and I'll be able to polish off those initial 2 volumes that remain in the provisional outline, and then double back into adding a whole slew of secondary references and whatnot. If you're at all familiar with, for instance, the Divine Office or the Book of Common Prayer, some of these liturgical books in the Christian tradition, where you're reading through a set series of readings every year, you'll understand something of the idea I have behind the project. And with that, we can really place our look at the news within a larger framework, because things are moving so very, very fast right now. And, I've commented on this, in fact, in different capacities over the months, is that things have happened in the past few years, which, had they happened a generation or 2 before, and certainly beyond that, would have been lifetime definitive events. I'll give you some examples here. The fall, so-called, of Kabul to the Islamic Emirate. In 20 and 21, I believe, August 15th, 20 and 21 is when the Taliban took Kabul. This event ought to have had the impression in people's memories generationally that the fall of Saigon did in the early 1970s. I think it was 1974, 75. The helicopters on the embassy and all that. And it didn't. It's remarkable. This event, for its significance, actually should have had a deeper imprint, if only because the Taliban war was significantly longer than even the long-ass Vietnam War. But I don't think most people, if you were to ask them, even people who somewhat keep up with the press, would really be able to tell you much about that. And if they could do that, they wouldn't really be able to analyze it in any depth whatsoever, why it should be memorable. And then another thing which is more recently struck me was, we'll just say, the Charlie Kirk event. Whether he died or whatever, trapdoors, being written out of the script, Allahu Alam, as the Muslims say, God knows best. Allahu Alam. I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'll do that elsewhere. But I may do it on this show in the future. I was lately asked to write a analysis, in fact, of the Charlie Kirk angle from my point of view. So you may, in fact, get my thoughts on the matter. But needless to say, just stick with the superficial. This man was killed publicly and very violently, and indeed very suddenly. That event ought to have stuck in our minds in the same fashion that the assassination, equally shady assassination of JFK, stuck in the minds of men in the 1960s. And here we are, but a few months on from those events in Arizona, whatever they were, in reality, they have faded. They have faded from memory, and what remains is a very strange catfight, shall we say, amongst, I don't even know, this whole blogosphere, which came, and commentariat, which came to the fore largely during the COVID-19 days. A certain coalition, which is breaking down at present, has literally slipped, insofar as anyone remembers what happened to Charlie Kirk, it's literally slipped into a type of soap opera between different actors in this commentariat, Candace Owens and Erica Kirk, and personality drama and things that are total wastes of time, but by golly, aren't they fun to watch? So those are two examples. So recapping the fall of Saigon compared to the fall of Kabul, and the assassination of JFK compared to the assassination, so-called, of Charlie Kirk. What's the point I'm making? Well, again, recapping that things are moving very, very quickly. And let us not be, in our closing minutes, let us not be like the people Netflix apparently is pitching themselves to here on Revolution Radio or elsewhere. Let us not be passive viewers. Let us not be watching and following and reading, especially reading all that we do as entertainment. But let's be going a little bit deeper, applying applying these events to larger stories and larger dramas of human life. And that's what I really indeed hope to bring to the fore during this series, again, every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern, and hopefully to add a depth to things, which is often missing, innocently enough, because of how much we're being bombarded with information. Our job here is to kind of slow things down, though it be a Monday, a very manic Monday for the lot of us, no doubt, though it be Mondays that we meet. It's going to be great to slow down with a cup of coffee and digest things. So we'll put things in a humanities perspective and larger literary and historical perspective. And once I get the reins of this revolutionary radio and the Discord, I look forward to being much more involved in the chit chat, which I see is very active. That's a great sign to the community that this station serves. And also I'll be able to lay out where we're going. I'll speak next week about how I will be integrating the topics on this weekly series with our college here in Connecticut and our, especially our Substack, which is something all of you have access to. Well, with that being seen to, I can hear the bumper music is starting up here, and it's been a delight to be jibber-jabbering with you for the last hour. I will see everyone next week with the proper title for this series, and we'll carry on there. Thanks so much. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, signing off.